Here are the most common foods that are sold or advertised as healthy, but are actually harming your liver and making your fatty liver disease worse. So in this video, I'll go over exactly which foods you need to watch out for and why. And I'm also going to talk about healthy alternatives to choose. Instead, if you follow these steps, you will start reversing your fat liver disease quickly and you'll start seeing changes in just weeks. Hi, I'm Dr. LTH Kim. I board certified in obesity and internal medicine, and on this channel I discuss the most up-to-date and evidence-based formations and the topics of weight loss, metabolic health, and longevity. Let's get into it. So, to start off, one of the most common foods that masquerades itself as healthy, but can actually be pretty toxic to your liver, is flavored yogurt. And that is because many flavored yogurts are just full of added sugar. Now, dairy products have natural sugars in them, which is fine, but it's the added sugar that's problematic. So if you look at the ingredient label for many of these healthy yogurts, you'll see they're just full of added sugars, and you especially have to be careful if it's advertised as low fat or high protein. What many companies do is they use these catchy words to make you believe they're healthy, but they don't mention the added sugars. So just to pick a random example, a Yoplait low-fat strawberry cup, just one single serving has 13 g of added sugar. Another example is this Chobani yogurt that is low-fat, okay, low-fat. So low calories, and it has mixed berries, which sounds healthy, but it has 14 g of added sugar. And it's not just one or two brands, but most yogurt brands are full of added sugar. And another example, Nua Lemon Yogurt Cup has a whopping 23 g of sugar. And even the high-protein yogurts, like Greek yogurts, they all still have the same issue. Now, to put this in perspective, the American Heart Association recommends limiting your daily added sugar to just 36 g for men and 25 g for women. So having just one of those tiny cups of yogurt will get you close to maxing out the limit that is recommended. And I would argue that limit should be even lower if you suffer from fatty liver disease or steatohepatitis or fibrosis. And the reason it's so important to track your sugar intake in reversing fatty liver disease is emphasized by the findings of this study published in JAMA that show that just 8 weeks of restricting sugars in adolescent boys to less than 3% of your daily calories has shown significant improvement in hepatic steatosis. So what should we do instead? Well, the good news is a lot of the same companies like Chobani or Yoplait or NSA do offer alternatives that have 0 g of added sugar, so I would just opt for those instead. But personally, after having tried many of those plain options, the taste just may not be there. So what I would recommend is opting for plain yogurt with no added sugar and then adding your own sweetener of choice. And the sweetener I would recommend is something like allulose or monk fruit. You can also add fresh berries and even a little bit of honey for the taste. By the way, if you want to learn more about allulose or monk fruit, I made a separate video on those earlier, and I'll post a link to those in the description below. Now, another thing that will help with the taste is choosing yogurt with normal fat content. So don't choose the one that is low fat or fat-free, because removing the fat changes the texture and makes it less enjoyable. Also, it makes the yogurt less filling, so you're more likely to overeat later on. And good healthy fats from dairy should not cause any issues unless those fats put us in the calorie surplus, okay, the second food that is often sold as a healthy snack. But another one of these foods that is just full of added sugar is granola. Now, granola is often touted as healthy because when it first became popular, it had less sugar than other breakfast foods. But a lot of the granola products still have just way too much added sugar. And by the way, yes, sugar is bad. But what is it about sugar specifically that is so toxic to our livers? Well, many of the added sugar are made from fructose, or variations of fructose, which is a simple sugar that is added to processed foods. Now, fructose is also known as fruit sugar because it primarily occurs naturally in fruits or honey or root vegetables. Now, right off the bat, I do want to emphasize that we do not need to worry about getting too much sugar or fructose from fruit itself, since the fresh fruit we consume is usually full of fiber, which slows down the absorption of excess fructose. And many fruits are also rich in vitamin C, which actually blocks the effects of excess fructose. So it's extremely hard to take in and absorb too much fructose from fresh fruits. The problem with our modern food environment is that we're now getting too much processed fructose from everyday foods. Because it's added for taste, it's also used as a preservative to extend the shelf life for food. And this is problematic for several reasons. Eating sugar, especially fructose, will make you crave more sugar. And we have functional MRI studies that show that ingesting fructose as opposed to glucose had a stronger activation in the visual cortex to high-calorie foods, and it produced the stronger activation in the nucleus accumbens, or the region of the brain that drives our desire for food. So the more fructose you consume, the more you're going to notice and have difficulty resisting high-calorie processed sugary foods. And another sinister thing about fructose is it does not stimulate leptin, which is a hormone that is released in our bodies after that signals satiety or fullness to our brains. So consuming even the smallest amounts of fructose doesn't generate a normal response of fullness in our brains, and it makes it very easy to overeat. And just to show you how quickly fructose can worsen your liver function, we have a study that showed that just 7 days of high fructose diet increased lipid deposition in the liver and a decreased insulin sensitivity. Now back to granola. Take a look at the nutrition label of your granola bar or your breakfast granola and make sure it doesn't have too many added sugars, as many of them unfortunately do. And while we're on the topic of breakfast foods, let's talk about breakfast cereals, even the ones that say they're high in fiber or high protein or heart healthy. Many of them are still full of added sugar, and even the oats, which should be pretty healthy and high in fiber. But if the oats are flavored or if they come in those little packets, chances are they still have way too much added sugar. So for any of these foods, I would just make it a habit to look at the ingredient label and see how many added sugars are there in a single serving. Okay, another sneaky food that is harming your liver health is juices. If you drink orange juice or apple juice or any type of juice, please look at the ingredient label to see how many grams of sugars you're getting in the serving. How a lot of these companies try to trick you is with the labels that say this juice contains natural sugars or it has 0 g of added sugars. And sure, it may be natural, but in a juice form, it's highly concentrated. And it doesn't have the protective fiber that we normally get from fresh fruit, so it's a lot easier to overconsume sugars. You're forgetting it in a liquid form. Also, you have to be careful with pre-made smoothies or bottle smoothies. That's another source of whopping doses of added sugar. The advertising for those smoothies usually includes language like natural or green or full of vitamins, and they say things like immune support. But once again, many of them are just packed with added sugar, and they come without the fiber that helps negate the excess sugar or fructose absorption. The next food that could be harming your liver is plant-based milk. Now, there's nothing wrong with non-dairy milk, but once again, you need to look at the ingredient label and see how many added sugars are in each serving. Many almond milks usually have more than 10 g of sugar per single serving. And by the way, the point here is not to avoid sugar or fructose altogether, but what I want to emphasize is we need to be aware of how much sugar we're consuming and where that sugar is coming from, because even a few sugars here and there add up very quickly and start causing issues with our liver health and our overall metabolism. The next food we need to be careful with is sushi. So fresh seafood by itself is an amazing source of protein. It's also a great source of healthy fats and many vitamins. But when we eat sushi, unfortunately what happens is we get very little of that fish, but we get a lot of the baggage that is added to the fish that can actually worsen your fatty liver. So if you're eating sushi rolls, it comes with overly processed rice and sauces that are just, once again, maybe high in processed sugars and processed fats. So when it comes to sushi, it helps to stay away from the rolls, but instead you can offer things like sashimi, which highlights the raw fish itself without the other additives. And finally, the food that may set you back when it comes to your liver health is trail mix or any kind of nut mix. Now, the nuts themselves is not an issue as they're full of vitamins and healthy fats, but it's to dry fruit in the mix is what tips it into a problem food. As we discussed, the sugar or fructose we get from fresh fruit does not cause problems, but when the fruit is dried, it doesn't have as much of a fiber content. So it's much easier to overeat, and it's much easier for it to cause blood sugar spikes, which can later lead to more insulin resistance and worsening of your fatty liver disease. Now, there's a lot more foods that we can talk about, but the bottom line is, if your food comes with ingredient label check to see how many sugars or ADD sugars are in each serving, and try to limit your daily intake to as little as you can. Also be extra cautious if your food label promotes something as healthy. One pattern you'll start recognizing is that a food that is advertised as low fat is usually high in sugars, and a food that is advertised as low in sugar is usually high in processed fat. By the way, it's not just a sugar or fructose that causes fatty liver disease. And if you want to learn more, I made a separate video on reversing fatty liver disease that you can check out over here. And I made another video on the best supplements to help you with the F liver disease that you can check out over here. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.